Hi there. In this video I'm going to be talking about Sonnet 18 by William Shakespeare, possibly one of the most famous sonnets and poems ever written in the English language. I'm going to be addressing it in terms of how an IB student may look at their individual oral commentary for English A, but even if you're not doing IB, hopefully some of the analysis here and comments could help you either write an essay or talk about this particular sonnet. So I'll go through it in a particular structure, pausing now and again just to show you what I'm trying to do. So if we start off, whether in your commentary or whether you're writing with an overview of the whole sonnet, I've color coded it to make it simple. You've got the three quatrains and the couplet at the end there. In general, in my introduction, I want to point out very briefly what's happening, and then possibly move towards a wider theme. So as I'm annotating on the right hand side here, you can see kind of little headlines that I have for each quatrain and then the couplet. And then as I work through, I'll keep referring back to these. So in a commentary in particular, it's good to have these little headlines that are like triggers that just help you kick off what the next point is. So as a general introduction, I would say as a summary of the sonnet here, the speaker is talking to his beloved as a young man in this collection of sonnets, thinking about whether to compare him to a summer's day, which obviously is the kind of classic stereotypical pleasant time of year. He decides that summer's day isn't really appropriate for various reasons that he goes through, however then claims that the lover's beauty will live on forever, not because of some immortality of the beloved, but actually through his power as a poet. And that leads us to the wider theme, the thesis or claim here below, of a more thematic point, whereas nature is not temporary, it's not permanent, rather it's temporary, and it will fade, as will his lover's beauty, admittedly. However, the thing that is eternal is the sonnet, which will be read and loved, maybe not for eternity, but for as long as people are around at least. So that gives me a nice little summary of what happens, but also hits the bigger picture, the theme, which is probably where the higher marks are. Okay, so that's my introduction. That would then signpost that in the next section I'm going to be looking at the first quatrain, and here we go with it. So Shakespeare starts by asking a question directly to the beloved, and then launches into the answer. There's no hanging about. He gets immediately into answering his rhetorical question. A summer's day clearly has connotations of warmth and pleasantness, and perhaps people being together. And so it seems like a fairly stereotypical, maybe Petrarchan even style of comparison. However, immediately in the second, third, and fourth lines, we see that the beloved is clearly better than a summer's day. A summer's day is not as good as perhaps we may first think. Being more lovely and more temperate. Temperate here refers more to temper and mood and being gentle rather than actual temperature. The rough winds of the darling buds of May may not be pleasant. May in Shakespearean time the calendar lagged a couple of weeks behind, so actually that was a summer's month. The darling buds are obviously the beginning of summer. The bud is something beautiful and positive, but equally, as we'll see later, something that doesn't last forever. It's not a permanent thing, unlike his poetry. Summer's lease is more of a legal term. It's something you have short ownership of before it goes. And Shakespeare's suggesting here that that's not appropriate. Then his beloved's beauty, it seems to suggest even here, is somehow more permanent than that, which is perhaps questionable because obviously everybody ages and eventually beauty fades. The other interesting thing of note here is the second word, the I is stressed, whereas the later on is not. It's a classic iambic form, but interestingly the I is stressed, which is appropriate because later on we see it is really about Shakespeare more than the beloved. So moving on, Shakespeare continues to go through the comparison of summer. Here we see the eye of heaven, which is clearly the sun, which is the provider of seasons such as summer. It's too hot, so again it's negative, and his gold complexion is dimmed, as in it's cloudy, sometimes it's grey. Not every summer's day, especially in England, is warm and sunny. The second part of the quatrain, fair, here refers to beauty. Every fair from fair sometime declines. In this line, Shakespeare takes it on a little bit and develops beyond just merely the comparing with a summer's day to something more that seems more general. Every fair from fair sometime declines by chance or nature's changing course, untrimmed. It's not particularly clear what untrimmed links to here, but the general impression is that beauty declines and you can't do anything about it. If we return to remember that this is actually talking about the beloved's beauty, this may seem a little strange, as clearly we would assume that beloved's beauty will also fade. So this poses a new kind of puzzle that we're seeing here. In the third quatrain, the first word "but" is the voltare, which is the turn or the turning point in most of Shakespeare's sonnets. And he goes back to referring to the beloved. Thy eternal summer shall not fade. Whereas summer we've just learned is temporary, somehow the beloved summer here, he connects it to his beloved. It becomes eternal. And again, so that puzzle then grows, and we think, well, how can that be? He's saying you won't lose possession of that beauty that you have, the ownest, or maybe owest. Maybe you owe it, you don't own it completely. Nor shall death brag you wander in his shade. This is a biblical allusion to Psalms, walking through the valley of death, which obviously Shakespearean readers would know. Death, so you'll even outsmart death. That won't be boasting that he's close by, because in eternal lines to time you'll grow. Now this is interesting. The lines here is worth looking at, the eternal lines. There's three options really. Are they lines that are linked to old age? It seems unlikely given we're talking about beauty here. Are they lines, eternal lines, as in hereditary lines, family lines that are passed through generation? Possibly he does talk about the beloved's beauty persevering through having children. But maybe what we're really getting at here are the lines that literally we're reading here, the lines of poetry. And these are the eternal lines that will create that eternal summer. That's the only kind of summer that will survive. Other summers come and go, clearly, every year. So we're getting towards a kind of solution here to the puzzle. And here we have it. This is like the reveal, if you like, the final section, the couplet here, where Shakespeare explains what he means as providing that men can breathe or eyes can see, this will survive and this gives life to thee. And look at that stress on the word this. Much like I earlier, thee is nowhere to be seen really here. The stress on this really is dominant, especially given the repetition. So nature is imperfect, it comes and goes. Art, however, like this poem, is eternal and therefore will be read for a long time. It's not quite eternal because he's talking about as long as men can breathe or eyes can see, but we get the sense that it's going to be outliving pretty much everything else. And there we have it. That's the power of Shakespeare, essentially. He was writing at his prime here. Quite an egotistical type of sonnet. It compares a contrast rather with the other earlier sonnets that talk about him being barren and not having life. So this is a Shakespeare on the top of his game. And to sum up, as I say, it really shows that the power of art here, Shakespeare thinks is more powerful than nature, including actually his beloved's beauty. And so while it's traditionally seen as a love sonnet and something that is very personal, it can be read that way, certainly. You can also see it as something that really is just promoting Shakespeare's pure talent as a writer. Moving on, signposting here what I'm going next. It's good to mention the form and structure somewhere in your commentary or your essay. Round about here would seem a good place. In terms of development, Shakespeare references mentions of time all the way through. We go from a summer's day to a month to a season, the sun, which, as I said, makes the seasons, and then eventually moving on to eternity through his progression. There's a thing called a couplet tie, which basically links a word in the first quartet with the couplet. Here, appropriately, it's I. It's a pun on I, because it's what we see in terms of beauty, but also I, as in Shakespeare, the powerful poet, if you like. There's a couple of word stresses that I mentioned as we go through. The I is stressed in the first quatrain, indicating it's about the speaker, not the person spoken to. And the couplet stress at the end is quite significant. It focuses very much on this particular sonnet rather than the beauty or the summer that we were talking about previously. So there we are, wrapping it up now, coming up to about 10 minutes. If you're doing an IOC, keep an eye on the clock. You want to be finishing round about now. Conclusion, very briefly sum up what you've just shown. Go back to that key message about nature, not outliving art, and try and give some sort of personal response to show that you appreciate the sonnet. So there we go. I hope that's useful. Thank you very much.